In the vast story of life on Earth, there were once creatures so strange, so otherworldly that if we saw them today, we might think they were from another planet. From armor-plated fish the size of buses to birds with teeth and claws, evolution has produced some truly unbelievable designs. Tonight, let's journey back through time to meet 5 extinct creatures so bizarre, they almost don't seem real. Dawn slides across the ancient pampas, and something tall steps out of the silver grass. It isn't a dinosaur and it isn't a modern bird. It's a runner with the posture of an athlete and the focus of a big cat, a creature tuned by isolation and time. Its head moves first, slow, deliberate, like a periscope above the plains. The beak curves like a scythe. The eyes are forward-facing enough to judge distance. It stands quite still as the breeze changes, letting the world come to it. This is the terror bird, the old master of South America's open country, and for a few quiet seconds it looks almost gentle. Then the spell breaks with a measured step. Long legs uncoiling, toes gripping, tendons humming, and the grass begins to whisper around it. Everything about this animal is a study in purposeful design. Those legs are not simply tall, they are sprung. The bones are slim and strong, giving the stride length of an ostrich and the planted stability of a sprinter out of the blocks. There is power hidden in the hips, where thick muscle meets a low centre of gravity. At speed, the bird's torso barely bobs, saving energy for the decisive moment. The wings are little more than stiff paddles, not for flight but for balance, like a tightrope walker's pole held close to the chest. Feathers lie close to the body, insulation and streamlining rather than the broad veins of flight. The neck is a living whip, a muscular cable that can hold the head perfectly still while the body moves, and then, in an instant, drive the beak down with shocking acceleration. Imagine watching it hunt. It does not lope endlessly like a wolf. It chooses. It watches herds of small hoofed mammals edging toward a watercourse, ears flicking. It notices the one that hesitates, the youngster that has drifted too far to the side, the rodent that froze a second too long. Then the body compresses into momentum. Footfalls land in a clean staccato rhythm, tap, tap, tap. Each step a long glide, each glide a low whisper of feathers. When the distance collapses, the neck becomes a lever. The head cocks slightly, the beak aligns with a vulnerability, the skull, the spine, the hip, and drops like a hatchet, not a thrash from side to side that would risk a broken beak. Rather a straight, brutal chop and a pull back, puncture and release again and again until the target stops moving. Small prey is simply pinned and gulped, the throat expanding in a slow, unsettling ripple as the meal disappears whole. There is an intelligence to its caution. It will not drive itself into the middle of a stampeding herd. It will pace the flowing edge, a dark keel beside a froth of bodies, waiting for a misstep. It will use the low, ferny scrub as blinds, and the soft light of morning to keep its silhouette broken. Its calls, if you could hear them, were probably not the shrieks we imagine, but resonant booms or drum-like notes that carry through grass and brush. The kind of sound you feel in your chest before you identify it with your ears. Maybe it called only at dawn and dusk, when the air is dense and the world is cool enough to listen. Up close, the head is both elegant and terrifying. The beak's tip hooks like a climbing axe, the edges sharp in front and reinforced behind, a tool for tearing and a pry bar for levering meat from bone. The nostrils sit high and back, safely out of the way of the messy business at the tip. The eyes, set deep and shaded by a heavy ridge, look forward just enough to make quick calculations. How far, how fast, how high must the next step be? You can almost see equations rippling across those pupils as grasses bend and small shapes bolt. When it lowers its head, the crest of the skull locks to the neck vertebrae, When it strikes, the whole spine, hips to beak, participates in the blow. Every movement conserves energy until it cannot, and then it spends it all at once. Its world is rich and strange. Giant armadillo relatives, living tanks with domed backs, graze nearby, too big and too armoured to be worth the risk. Stocky herbivores browse on low branches, their hooves quiet in the dust. Their young drifting toward the fringes where danger concentrates. There are crocodiles in the rivers, cats in the shadows, and a whole nation of rodents, some rabbit-sized, some dog-sized, rustling through seed and leaf. The terror bird occupies a niche that no living creature does quite the same way. The sprinter striker of the open plain. A feathered analogue to a saber-tooth in strategy if not in form. It is not clumsy. It is not reckless. It is patient because patience wins. When it feeds, the scene is clinical rather than gory. A kill is dragged to a quieter patch, away from the attention of other hunters. The beak works with methodical motions, down, clamp, pull, scissoring skin, separating muscle, probing for joints that surrender with a soft pop. The tongue is surprisingly dexterous, guiding morsels to the back of the throat. Between mouthfuls, the bird stands very still and listens. The slightest tremor of grass, a distant patter of feet, the faint note of arrival, and it lifts the head, frozen statue again, ready to bolt or defend. If a bigger predator arrives, the terror bird yields the carcass with cold calculation. It consumed the most important parts already. It can make another kill before noon. There is tenderness in its life too, although we can only infer it. A shallow scrape in the earth lined with dry grass and feather down tucked against a hummock where wind passes over. Eggs, not many because fewer eggs mean more care, turned with a precise gentle tap of the beak. The adult's body a windbreak, a shade, a living wall against chill mornings. The chicks hatch with strong legs and open eyes, all knees and curiosity, learning to freeze at a low hiss, to follow the rhythm of the long stride, to peck at beetles and chase the darting shadows that resolve occasionally into something edible. For a while they are safest when they are invisible. Later, when their legs lengthen and their balance settles, they are safest when they are fast. What exactly did it look like to our eyes? Probably not the glossy black monster of pulp illustrations. More likely the matty browns and dusty creams of grassland birds, the subtle broken patterns that let an outline vanish in sun-bleached stalks. Maybe the neck wore a deeper band of colour, a signal flare for its own kind and a threat mark for everyone else. We don't know, and that uncertainty is part of its power. It is a silhouette first and a detail second, a shape your mind understands before your reason catches up. As the day climbs and thermals shimmer above the plains, the terror bird rests in the lee of a scrub thicket, one foot tucked up, eyelids lowered to slits. It's not a mindless killer. It is a manager of energy in a hot world. Midday is for stillness. Late afternoon is for moving again, tracing the edges of water and the rim of herds, cutting across scent trails that are hours old to find the fresh ones. When it encounters another adult, there is no roaring clash, just a quiet, formal exchange of posture. Head high, wings lifted a fraction, a measured step sideways to show size. If there is conflict, it is brief. Sharp kicks, a clack of beaks, then distance again. Feathers settle, the plains breathe. In the great story of continents, South America spent millions of years on its own crafting oddities in isolation. Here, predatory birds rose to the throne and held it with composure, and the terror bird was their ambassador to the open sky. In time, bridges formed, new mammals arrived, climates shifted, and the old certainties thinned. But in the moment we meet it, here in the cool light of morning, it is exactly what it needs to be. No need to roar, no need to posture. It stands, it listens, it chooses, it runs, and the last thing its prey ever sees is a calm, steady eye and a beak that descends like a falling star. If you were there, you might doubt your senses. A bird that hunts like a cat, runs like an athlete, and strikes like a blade. It sounds invented. Yet the earth remembers its footfalls, faint but definite, stitched into ancient sediments. The idea of it lingers, tall and self-possessed, the quiet shape at the edge of the herd. And even now, when we think of impossible creatures, some part of that shape rises in the mind. Feathers dark against pale grass, a hook of beak catching the first light, and the measured cadence of footsteps that belong to a bird that did not need to fly to rule the sky. 500 million years ago, the seafloor was a soft, dark carpet of microbial mats, rubbery biofilms quilting the bottom in wrinkled swells. Across this living landscape, something tiny moves with careful, measured steps. It is scarcely longer than your finger, pale and translucent like a sliver of moonlight. A row of rigid spines rises from its back like a picket fence. Beneath, a line of soft, stubby limbs tips forward and grips the mat with tiny paired claws. It pauses, leans, and advances again. An ancient walker on a world that had only just learned to build bodies with skeletons and spikes. This is Hallucigenia, the animal that looks like an inside joke from evolution, and yet, the more you look, the more its logic appears. Up close, its architecture is simple and strange. The body is a narrow tube, gently tapering from one end to the other. Along the top run those famous dorsal spines, stiff, conical, and evenly spaced, each one a miniature spear rooted in the skin. They are not legs, they are barricades, a hedge of do not bite me signs aimed at anything with a mouth. Below, 8 or so pairs of soft lobes extend like little stockings, each finishing in 2 curved claws. These are the real legs. They do not spring or leap, they pad and pull, testing the ground, hooking into the mat and pulling the body forward with a slow, deliberate rhythm. Viewed from the side, the animal is all contrast. Hard spikes above, soft feet below, a silent warning riding on a patient commuter. The head is a mystery solved and resolved across a century of study. In the earliest reconstructions, scientists quite literally put the animal upside down, spines interpreted as legs mistaken for tentacles. Even the face was placed at the wrong end, a blob crowned with a tuft that turned out to be damage, not anatomy. Time and new fossils revealed the truth. The head is the small, tapered end with a simple mouth ringed by tiny teeth, likely connected to a throat lined with inward-pointing spicules. Nothing dramatic, no jaws, no cutting beak, just a circular opening designed to take in soft bits of food and keep them from washing back out. Simple eyes, if present, were little more than dim sensors, patches of light and dark telling it where brightness fell across the mat. The result is a creature that navigates by touch and taste, preferring certainty to spectacle. That certainty lives in the legs. Each limb ends with a paired claw, 2 hooks that pinch the surface like hiking crampons scaled for a world of slime and silk. Imagine the gait. The front pair reaches, the claws set, the body draws forward as the rear legs release. Then the next pair reaches, and the next, a rolling wave of grip and glide that keeps the belly just clear of the mat. On firmer patches, the steps sharpen into a tiny staccato. On softer drifts, the claws probe for hidden firmness, finding the sweet spots where the microbial carpet has knit itself tight. If you could hear it, the sound would be a whisper of contact. Touch, hold, pull, touch, hold, pull. An animal composed of patience and persistence. What does it eat in a place like this? Not fish. There were none yet with bones like ours. Not tall plants, those were still a dream of the distant land. Hallucigenia is a browser of the low and the loose, flecks of organic debris settled from the water column, bacterial films, soft tissue shed by avowed animals, perhaps even the gelatinous scraps left behind after larger hunters have torn prey apart. The mouth's inward-facing teeth would have helped grip this delicate fare. Peristaltic waves in the gut would have done the rest, drawing nourishment through a tube that was likely as simple as the body itself. It is a recycler in an experimental ecosystem, turning the throwaway leftovers of the Cambrian surge into motion. Of course, where there is food, there is danger. The Cambrian seas hosted their own nightmares. Arthropod predators with grasping spines, shrimp-like hunters with serrated rakes, the legendary Anomalocaris gliding like a manta with a ring of toothed plates in its mouth. Against a giant, a tiny worm with legs cannot fight. It can only make itself not worth the effort. That's what the dorsal spines are for. Bite here, and your mouth fills with needles. Swallow this, and the interior of your throat learns regret. Even a gentle press might drive a spike into soft tissue. For the predators of that time, the lesson is quick. Look elsewhere. In the arms race of eat and avoid being eaten, Hallucigenia bets on deterrence more than flight. Its skin, technically a cuticle, would have been an elastic sleeve, periodically molted as the animal grew. Molting is both vulnerability and renewal. In the hours after shedding, the new cuticle is soft, the spines flex. The world becomes a place of caution. The animal keeps to the wrinkles in the mat, the shaded creases where currents ease and eyes overlook. Then the cuticle hardens again, the spikes return to their crisp geometry, and the normal rhythm resumes. Growth by shedding is a fundamental habit of the broader tribe. Hallucigenia belongs to Lobopodians, early cousins on the family tree that eventually branches into velvet worms, arthropods, and the microscopic tardigrades. If you've ever seen a velvet worm creep through moss with soft feet and paired claws, you've glimpsed a living echo of this ancient design. For all its otherness, there is a coherence to the animal that feels almost peaceful. It is neither assassin nor athlete. It is a pragmatic traveller, adapted to a surface that is itself alive. The microbial mat is not just ground, it is a pantry and a map, a textured memory of currents and disturbances. Hallucigenia reads that map with its claws, avoiding bare patches scoured by storms, seeking hummocks where detritus collects. When sediment drifts down like grey snow, it pauses and lets the tiny grains settle around its spines, which now act like stakes anchoring a tent. When the current rises, the body tucks a little lower and the legs shorten their reach, hugging the mat the way a sailor crouches on a deck. Night and day meant less in the Cambrian shallows than we think. Light filtered through the haze, tempests came and went, but cycles still ruled. Perhaps in calmer intervals, Hallucigenia ventured more openly across the mat, crossing miniature canyons carved by ripples. Perhaps in turbulent times it lingered in lee-side eddies, clustered with others in sheltered hollows where spines overlapped like a thicket. If there was a season at all, it might have been written in the plankton. Weeks when the water seemed full of fine food, weeks when even the biofilm felt thin underfoot. Through it all, the animal endures by being small, careful, and uninteresting to eat. The name, Hallucigenia, says as much about us as about the animal. When people first peered at these fossils, they saw a shape that refused their categories. Legs that looked like spines, a head that refused to show its face, a body that seemed too improbable to obey the rules. Over time, better preservation and new outcrops revealed more specimens, including relatives from far-off deposits that showed the proper orientation, spines up, claws down, clarifying what was defense and what was locomotion. a faint ring of teeth around the mouth, a hint of spines in the throat, the arrangement of legs along the belly. Each discovery turned the fever dream into a blueprint. The strangeness remains, but it is now the strangeness of an unfamiliar solution, not a violation of the sense. Picture, finally, a quiet scene. The water is clear for once and sunlight breaks into bars on the bottom. A few trilobites, helmeted scavengers with jointed legs, trundle by at a careful distance. A soft-bodied animal, broad and leaf-like, sifts the surface. Between them, Hallucinia works its way along the crest of a ripple, spines catching the light as needle points. It reaches the lee side, tests the mat with its front claws, and levers itself over the ridge with a tiny, practiced heave. If you blink, you miss the movement entirely. It's not here to impress you. It's here to go on, one small step at a time, carrying a design that, once decoded, makes the ancient seafloor feel less alien and more like a place where even the oddest bodies can fit. And that is the secret of this little marvel. It looks fake only because our imaginations grew up on modern animals. In its own world, Hallucinia is perfectly real, spines for no, claws for go, a mouth for enough. A solution written in the grammar of the Cambrian, legible at last when we turn it the right way up. The sea is dim and green, a shallow inland basin warmed by a Devonian sun. Silt drifts like smoke above a low forest of corals and stromatoporoids. Near the drop-off where light fades and currents carry the scent of open water, something vast waits, motionless at first, then flexing with the slow confidence of a creature that has no natural enemy. The skull is a fortress of bone plates that interlock like ship armour. The mouth is a pair of sharpened shears, not teeth in the modern sense, but exposed jaw blades honed by wear each time they close. A shadow passes across the reef's edge, and the water answers with a sudden vacuum, a snap, a brief shudder in the schooling fish. Silence again. Where a body had been, there is only a disordered cloud of scales. Dunkleosteus is not built for ornament. From the back of the head forward, it is all engineering, thick dermal plates hinged at certain sutures, a skull that is simultaneously shield and machine. Beneath that bony mask, a system of levers and tendons couples the skull roof to the lower jaw and throat, what engineers would later call a 4-bar linkage. Lift the skull slightly, and the lower jaw swings open in a lightning arc. Drop the skull and the jaws scissor shut with crushing authority. The opening is as important as the closing. In a blink, the expanding mouth generates suction that drags prey toward the blades, denying it the escape of water. In a world before tuna and marlin, this is what high performance looks like. Accelerate the mouth, accelerate the meal. The business edges of those blades are an elegant menace. The biting surfaces are bare bone but not dull. As the upper and lower plates rub past each other, they wear unevenly and maintain a narrow knife-like edge. It is a self-sharpening system. Every successful bite keeps the tool in top condition. Bone, cartilage, armour, everything that passes between those edges can be scored and split. Many fossils of contemporaries show arcing gouges, a signature written in scars, a failed attack, a glancing blow, a near miss that still left a mark. The message is simple. Something heavy with a steel mouth patrolled these waters. Behind the armour, the body turns to softer materials that rarely fossilize. Muscle, connective tissue, the flexible scaffolding that powered the beast. Reconstructions give it a deep, fusiform torso, tapering to a strong tail with pectoral fins that angle like control surfaces. Heavy in front, agile at the middle, explosive at the rear. The kind of build that favours ambush over chase, short bursts over drawn-out pursuit. It patrols the edges of reefs and the boundaries between clear and murky water, where contrast hides a silhouette. It waits where the slope steepens, and prey that hug structure must either skirt past the moor or risk open water. Either way, a wrong decision ends the same. If you could feel the water as it approaches, you would detect the faintest tremor, the barest pressure wave, then absence. Dunkleosteus keeps its head aligned, eyes protected by the overhanging rim of bone, watching with the patience of a cliff. It senses movement through the lateral line, a field of tiny canals along its flanks that registers vibration and flow. The world arrives as a pattern of ripples, the dithering glide of a cephalopod, the panicked jitter of a fish school, the steady thrum of a large arrival in the distance. When the pattern resolves into opportunity, the gill chamber widens, the skull tilts, and the mouth becomes a trapdoor in the sea. Its prey is a gallery of early experiments, armoured placoeurs d'hermes smaller than itself, quick sharks with ribbon tails, torpedo-shaped ray fins, coiled ammonoids with paper-thin shells. No one strategy works against all of them, so Dunkleosteus develops a suite of tactics. Against armoured fish, it aims for a seam, the joint behind the head plate, the softer belly, the base of a fin. Against swift skimmers, it counts on the shock of sudden suction to ruin a getaway. Against shelled invertebrates, it simply applies force until geometry fails. You can imagine the crunch reverberating in bone and water alike, the sound of a problem solved through pressure. Day in the Devonian is not like ours. The continents sit in unfamiliar places, the air carries more storms, and the seas are punctuated by anoxic lulls that turn whole basins dark. In clearer intervals, sunlight pours down and the reef crests bloom. Here, juvenile fish swarm in the lee of sponges, and shell builders spiral into complexity. Dunkleosteus moves through this brightness like a thunderhead at noon, slow, imposing, careful with energy. It does not need to feed constantly, it feeds decisively, then cruises the thermocline where temperatures shift and currents gather food. When the water becomes milky with plankton bloom, it stays deeper, a shadow below the feast, waiting for the careless shape that blunders down. The armour seems like overkill until you see it in action. A smaller predator darts in, aiming for the eye or gill opening, and finds only a rim of bone and a snap that returns the favour. Hard plates turn slashes into glancing skids. They make the difference between a fight and an inconvenience. The cost of all that bone is weight and drag, paid back by confidence. Dunkleosteus attends to its business without hurry, because hurry is for animals that can be hurt. There is tenderness here too, hidden in the lineage. Some of its placoderm cousins carried embryos inside their bodies, tiny young developed within, nourished and protected until birth. If Dunkleosteus shared this strategy, and it very well might have, then there was a season when its armoured bulk harboured small, soft copies of itself. Picture a quiet trench along the reef base where currents calm, the water slightly warmer. Picture an adult holding station, mouth half open, ventilating slowly, while within life unspools at a measured pace. No nest, no parental care in the modern sense, just the ancient internal promise that the next generation would begin with a head start. Rest looks like drifting, but is not. The big fish hovers with micro-adjustments of fin and tail, easing into the slow conveyor belt of a boundary current, letting the water carry it around the reef's spine. The armour creaks, at least it seems it should, though you would hear nothing but the deep hush of gill water. Smaller fish pick parasites from its flanks, opportunists in the some shadow of a machine that neither notices nor minds. In the half-light, counter-shading likely cloaks its form, darker above, paler below, an old trick that makes volume seem flat. The colour is guesswork, the strategy is timeless. Sometimes it hunts high, where sunlight breaks into ladders. Schools split and braid around it, tracking the risk of nearness against the safety of numbers. The mouth flashes open, just a dark geometric shape, a hole where water used to be, and closes again, and a sudden poverty opens in the school's weaving pattern. Sometimes it hunts low, gliding parallel to the mud where the smell of dead things collects. Scavenging is not beneath it. Efficiency governs all choices. If there is meat to be had without cost, the shears will free it, and the ancient sea will churn it forward. You might expect such a creature to own the open water, but excellence creates rivals. Other armoured fishes grow large. Sharks, sinewy and tireless, draft behind and beside the big predator's world. Competition in the inland seas is a tapestry of near misses and calculated retreats. Dunkleosteus is not omnipotent. It is simply the apex of a particular design philosophy. Protect the front, accelerate the mouth, monetize the bite. It wins often enough to keep growing. The bones remember that growth. The great head plates are not smooth slabs. They carry fine lines, ridges, sutures, records of change, signs of muscles tugging and strengthening. The quiet autobiography of an animal written in calcium phosphate. Each suture is an argument settled between flexibility and strength. Each ridge is a past of forces applied and resisted. If you hold such a plate in your hands, and people have, plucked from black shell where the sea turned still and oxygen fled, you cradle a piece of architecture that solved 1,000,000 similar problems and left the solution in its surface. Time, even for monarchs, moves on. The Devonian ends not with a crash, but with a drawn-out unravelling. Reefs decline, seas stagnate, oxygen dwindles, and the intricately balanced food webs fray. The armoured dynasties recede. Where Dunkleosteus once carved its path, leaner hunters begin to dominate, sharks without face plates, bodies fashioned from cartilage and speed, mouths filled with true teeth that can be replaced endlessly as they wear. The great shears go quiet. The fortressed head settles into stone. The inland seas turn pages. And yet, in the imagination, it remains immediate. An animal with a guillotine set into its skull sounds like fantasy, something cooked up in a sketchbook to thrill and terrify. But the reality is cleaner than a myth and more persuasive. It is a machine that breathes, an equation of leverage and flow written into a face. The reef's edge seems safer with it gone, but emptier too. Apex predators do not just frighten, they organise. They teach the sea where to be careful. In their absence, the instructions must be rewritten. Picture it one last time at the margin of the light, the armoured brow cutting a wedge in the water, the mouth a geometric answer to the problem of food, the tail delivering a single exact shove that places the animal where it must be. Around it, brittle stars coil and uncoil, naive fish glitter and pivot, and a coiled shell drifts too far from the safety of rock. The skull tilts by a degree most eyes would miss. The space before the jaw collapses into itself. The blades close with the soft certainty of a door finding its frame. Where a shape had been, there is a drift of particulate settling on coral. It looks fake until you imagine the physics of it. Then it feels inevitable. In a world young enough to still be inventing its rules, Dunkleosteus wrote one of the cleanest. If you can turn water into a path and force into a blade, the sea opens. The Cambrian Sea glows with sifted light. A tremor of sunbeams turn to ribbons by drifting silt. On the plain between sponge gardens and rippled sand, a small shadow hovers, no bigger than your hand, translucent as wet rice paper, and stranger than anything that should plausibly work. A crown of 5 eyes swivels like the optics of a tiny submersible. Beneath them, a flexible trunk unfurls, ends in a delicate claw, and tests the world with a pickpocket's care. It is neither fish nor worm, not quite arthropod as we know them, but a stem-branch experiment with its own rules. It glides forward without fuss, and the sea around it doesn't even notice, until the little claw closes. It is easy to fixate on the 5 eyes, and perhaps that is the point. Imagine being a handspan long, soft as a jelly bag in a neighbourhood patrolled by serrated rakes and ring-mouthed vacuum cleaners. Sight is safety. The eyes sit on short stalks, not all the same size, arranged to watch upward for silhouettes, sideways for movement along the bottom, and ahead where the trunk points. They are not the compound mosaics of a dragonfly. They are simpler cups that still drink in enough light to warn, to measure, to choose. When the body drifts forward, each eye searches a slightly different slice of space, and the animal stitches those slices into a low-resolution map of what matters: threat, shelter, food. The mouth, perversely, does not sit at the front. Tucked underneath the head and angled backwards, it is a little ringed opening that isn't built to bite off chunks so much as to accept deliveries. Enter the trunk, a flexible, muscular hose with joints subtle enough to curl into crevices and precise enough to pluck a morsel the size of a sesame seed. Its tip ends in a pincer, not built for crushing but for grasping, an elegant hand to the mouth's quiet door. The trunk reaches, pinches, retracts in a smooth arc, and the mouth accepts what is offered. Everything about the feeding choreography says, keep your vulnerable parts away from trouble. From above, the body is a leaf of living translucence. A series of side lobes lines the trunk like fins on a cuttlefish, and just above those lobes run delicate combs of filaments, gill-like structures that trade gases with the water. Movement is a matter of waves. The lobes flame to life in sequence, left, right, a metachronal ripple that lifts the animal a hair's breadth off the bottom and slides it forward. It is not a sprinter, nor does it need to be. Speed is for chasers. Opabinia is a hovercraft, a reader of currents, a fingertip on the seafloor's pulse. Watch it work a patch of mat. The trunk extends and fans side to side, tasting with the tip, feeling for the texture of bacterial film, for the looseness that means detritus, for the faint tickle of a worm's body shifting under grains. When it finds something, the last joint bends with a surgeon's confidence, the claw closes, and the prize travels back along a path the animal has used 1,000 times. The mouth does not chew, it ushers. The gut takes over with peristaltic patience, sending the day's little winnings down a corridor lit by the soft hum of chemical work. If you could shrink and stand within, you'd see not gears but gradients, differences in concentrations doing what muscles arrange from outside. Predators complicate this serenity. A trilobite larger than a thumb trundles by, blinders of calcite framing its world. Above, the shadow of a swimming hunter drifts for a moment and vanishes, a hint of something with grasping arms and a circular maw. Opabinia does not panic, it thins. The lobes press closer to the bottom, the body flattens, the 5 eyes ratchet to new angles. A flick from the tail fan adjusts position, just a few body lengths to the lee of a sponge where the flow softens and scent trails scramble. If danger persists, the animal slides into the trough between ripples, presenting nothing but the faintest outline to whatever hunts by sight. Survival here is often a matter of not offering a good angle. An odd calm radiates from its design. There are no spines to brandish, no plates to clang. Softness is a strategy. Yield to flow, minimize drag, spend energy only when information is clear. The 5 eyes gather that information relentlessly. One catches a change in brightness, another sees a jitter in the near field. The central pair focus on the trunk's work, keeping the business end honest. The result is a life made of small, correct choices, repeated. This crack, not that one. This eddy, not the open. This moment, not the previous heartbeat. It is tempting to call it a scavenger and be done, but the trunk refuses simplicity. See how it probes below the lip of a fallen sponge, how it curls under and then up, fishing the underside where small bodies cling to the shaded film. The claw closes on something that wriggles. For a fraction of a second, the animal's whole posture changes. Eyes tighten their gaze, lobes stiffen, tail hull fan braces. The trunk retracts with a touch more urgency, feeds the mouth, and the body relaxes back into its habitual float. This is not passivity, this is a specialist's confidence. The world is full of scraps and slow things. A patient pincher thrives. We do not know how it courted, or if it held to territories, or whether the five eyes flashed with any message other than "I am watching." But we can guess at seasons of more of the same, the bottom blooming with microbial slick after a nutrient pulse, weeks when fine silt settles and the matte skin toughens like parchment, days when storms above hammer the water and the safe places are few. Through each cycle, the cuticle that sheathes its body would be replaced in molts, the animal slipping from one suit into another. For a brief hour, the new skin is soft. An Opabinia chooses then to be most discreet, wedged under a ledge, trunk coiled, eyes slit to the bare minimum until the world's sandpaper can't bruise it. It lives among prototypes that later history will adopt and refine. Jointed limbs, gills raked like combs, eyes that turn light into prediction. Around it, trilobites test armor philosophies, early worms drill first drafts of burrows, and great hunters knit strange spines into even stranger mouths. Opabinia is a quiet clause in that sentence, a clause that says, reach safely, see widely, move gently. In a landscape of bold attempts, it is an argument for finesse. Long after the animal itself is gone, mud rescues its outline. A slope collapses above a Cambrian reef, burying the garden in a fine anoxic blanket. The sea does its chemistry slowly, trading flesh for films of carbon and minerals that remember where lobes once beat and where the trunk once curled. When a paleontologist pries those black pages open, the animal appears as a ghostly negative, eyes and proboscis, like punctuation marks in a forgotten script. The first time a modern audience saw the reconstruction, with the five eyes perched on stalks and the flexible trunk draped forward, laughter rose not because it was silly, but because it punctured the assumption that deep time must resemble our preferences. The joke, if any, is on our imagination's caution. Stand one body length from it, if you could, and the charm increases. The eyes do not stare so much as pass. The trunk is not a proboscis of greed, but a bridge to safety. Keep the feeding away from the head. Let the world happen at a small distance. A gentle pulse runs along the lobes as they reset for the next glide. On the sea floor, a rain of tiny debris falls always, and the animal arranges itself under that rain, catching a share of what the great conveyor of life sends down. It is a posture of acceptance, not surrender. Does it look fake? Only until you follow the cause and effect lines inside it. Five eyes because turning your head is expensive. A trunk because mouths at the front die young. Side lobes because swimming like a flag wastes fuel. A tail fan because the world sometimes requires an immediate opinion. Every oddity resolves under patient attention into a solution to a problem that still exists. How to eat without being eaten when you are made of softness in a place of teeth. So let it hover there a while longer in your mind. A translucent leaf, filmed with life, carrying a crown of watchfulness and a hand on a long arm, threading through a forest of sponges as old water murmurs past. It does not know that one day it will be pressed into stone and lifted into air by creatures with only two eyes, who will try to name it into familiarity. It knows only the mathematics of drift and reach, the comfort of a shadowed eddy, the contentment of a mouth fed by a patient, precise touch. In the theatre of the Cambrian, where the loudest characters often get the headlines, Opabinia keeps the scene alive between the crashes, the quiet, improbable actor whose logic reveals itself one careful movement at a time. Dawn comes thin and cool over a late Cretaceous floodplain. The river is low, leaving bands of damp sand and islands of reeds. From behind a stand of willow-like shrubs, something tall drifts into view, narrow head high above the brush, neck long and deliberate, torso broad like a barrel carried on hips made for steady steps. When it stops, the arms unfold. 3 fingers extend, and at the end of each finger a blade curves, ungules as long as a man's forearm, matte and dark along their edges. They look theatrical until they move. Then they are tools. Chooses a branch dense with seed pods and fibrous leaves. One arm reaches, the claw hooks, the wrist rotates. The entire branch comes down like an obedient lever. A beak, keratin over bone, snips and strips. Quick bites taken with tidy efficiency. There are teeth behind the beak, small and leaf-shaped, enough to shear whole upon soft matter before it slides into a gut that is the real engine of this body. A long, fermenting chamber hidden behind that deep, wide rib cage. A few mouthfuls, then release. The branch springs back, ragged along its edge. Another reach, another pull. The routine is practiced, quiet, economical. Nothing about it looks like a predator at work. Move your attention to the feet and you see why the rest can happen. They are broad, with 4 weight-bearing toes splayed for stability, spreading the animal's weight in mud and sand. Each step plants without drama, knee and ankle aligning to keep the heavy midsection balanced. The tail is not a whip, it is a counterweight, a simple answer to a simple problem. Keep the center stable so the arms can do complicated things. When a gust shifts the reeds, the torso hardly sways. The neck corrects with small, smooth arcs, keeping the head level as if a line had been drawn from eye to horizon. The claws dominate the imagination, so it is easy to miss the other investments. The shoulder girdle is large and low, the arms shockingly long for a theropod, with big muscle origins along the chest and back. Power lives here, not for slashing at running animals, but for dragging vegetation close, for wedging and prying, for fending off whatever insists on proximity. The claws themselves are bone cord and sheathed in keratin, their living edges maintaining geometry through wear. They are too long and gently curved for digging burrows, too delicate at the tips for hammering. They are perfect for hooking, for pulling, for making distance wider than the length of an approaching skull. The body wears a coat that is not scales alone. Far to the north and east, close relatives kept filamentous coverings, simple feathers, some even with stiff quill-like strands. If family resemblance holds, this giant carries a patchwork of filamentous plumage over shoulders, back and tail, thinner along the belly where heat needs a path out. The colours aren't knowable, the purpose is. Feathers smooth the boundary layer when wind rises, hold warmth during cold nights on the plain, and give young something to hide in while they learn the slow dance of arm and branch. On dry afternoons, dust works into the coat. Later, a rub against shrubs shakes it free. It belongs to a lineage that grew forward from predatory ancestors and then took a left turn into plant eating. The skull tells that story, a narrow snout becoming a cropping beak, teeth reduced and reshaped for slicing rather than tearing, jaw muscles built for steady pressure instead of explosive bite. The pelvis widened to make room for a capacious gut. Vertebrae along the back broadened to support the load. Evolution traded sprinting and seizing for standing and reaching, traded a flash of violence for a day's worth of digestion. The result is odd if you carry the wrong expectations. If you watch what it does all day, every day, it becomes obvious. The floodplain supplies the routine. Softwoods along the channels offer seasonal leaves. Low shrubs carry tender shoots. Reed beds contribute rhizomes in dry spells when the water retreats and mud gives up its buried stores. The animal moves with the river's schedule, following green upriver as new banks appear. then drifting down when freshets turn clear water murky and heavy with suspended grit. It is tall enough to browse what smaller herbivores cannot, cautious enough to leave the highest canopy to long-necked neighbours. Where a grove is dense, it threads slowly between trunks, claws close to the body. Where the plain opens, it lengthens its stride and raises its head to look for trouble. Trouble has a name here. A big tyrannosaur works the same country, running the coastline of the river with the patience of a long-distance hunter. When wind shifts and the scent arrives, dry, iron-tinged, edged with rot, the Therizinosaur changes posture. Arms come forward not to strike but to warn. The torso turns slightly side-on, making the profile wider. One foot slides back to brace. There is no roar. The threat display is geometry. A wall of reach, 10 hooked crescents presented as a question the predator must answer. Often, that is enough. Why commit to a wrestling match with a thing that can open you with a hug? If the big head keeps coming, the browser backs into a tangle of branches, making its flanks hard to access, forcing the attack to come from where the claws are already waiting. Between confrontations, there are quieter calculations. Heat builds after noon. Breathing quickens. The animal stands in shallow water to cool its feet and belly, wades deeper until the current licks the lower ribs. There it stands, pulling overhanging stems within reach, letting fish slip between its toes. Insect clouds rise and settle across the hide, and small birds, or their Cretaceous equivalents, might light for a moment to pick at ticks. When the wind freshens, it steps onto a sandbar where the breeze moves straight across the feathers. Evaporative math does the rest. Growth is slow because bulk requires time. A youngster is all legs and caution, shadowing an adult at first, experimenting with pulling small branches before its arms have the length and leverage for the high work. It learns where the ground is treacherous, caking clay that steals a foot, undercut banks that promise water and give collapse. It learns the map of the plain, the oxbows that hold water when the channel migrates away, the low saddles across which herds funnel during dry weeks, the patches of woody browse that leaf out earliest after a storm. Education is repetition until repetition becomes instinct. The mouthfuls it takes are small compared to its size. That is deliberate. Chewing is not the point, throughput is. Each bite is a unit of fibrous plants sent down to a fermentation factory, where microbes do the heavy lifting, breaking down cellulose, releasing energy, generating gas that must be managed with easy vents, and a stance that makes long digestion compatible with balance. The broad hips and four-toed stance turn a potential liability into a platform. A raptor-hipped predator would look top-heavy with such a belly. This animal looks planted. You expect silence from something that moves this carefully. But the plain is not sourd or mute. Leaves rasp across the keratin of the beak. Branches creak under load and snap back with a sigh. Now and then a deep, chesty, booming call carries across the floodplain. A low-frequency sound that doesn't advertise to every ear, but tells others of its kind that an animal of size is here, unhurried, intact. Whether they gather is unclear. If they do, it is loose and temporary, drawn by a patch of good browse or a safe crossing. Proximity is opportunity, not obligation. Fossils say little about colour or display, but the architecture of the arms suggests communication beyond aggression. A slow lift, claws held outward, could signal size from a distance. A measured sweep through shoulder height might be enough to convince a rival to browse elsewhere. In mating seasons, if seasons tighten and loosen the plain's resources on a schedule, the same geometry could factor into choice. Bright pigments would be wasteful on a body that spends its time in dust and brush. Posture and movement carry farther and last longer. As afternoon leans toward evening, shadows extend along the terrace. The animal chooses higher ground for the night, open enough to see approach, close enough to cover in case the moon rises and the world is bright. It stands to rest, locking knees, neck coiled in a half S, head turned back along the line of its body. Every so often the arms unfold in a lazy stretch and fold again. Sleep is shallow, easily broken by the scrape of claws on bark or the slap of a fish in a nearby pool. Storms rearrange everything. When a wall of rain sweeps in from the west, the river rises and brown water smears the channels into new courses. Trees go down, sandbars appear where none had been. The next day is inventory day. Sniff the new edges, test the new mud, learn where a step sinks past safety. Fallen trunks become buffet lines, bark peeling away from sapwood, cambium sweet and full of stored energy. The claws, which seem made only for menace at a glance, shine here as precise levers, a hook under a strip of bark, a twist, and a seam opens for the beak. Repeat that 100 times and a storm becomes a windfall. It is easy to call the animal monstrous because the claws warp scale, but everything conspires toward a simple life strategy. Stay upright, reach far, eat tough plants, let microbes turn time into calories, and make yourself inconvenient to attack. The cost of being inconvenient is mass and a pace that never hurries. The benefit is surviving long enough to turn green growth into Moore's bodies like yours. By the time the sky drains of colour and the first stars come on, the floodplain has cooled. Frogs start up along the backwaters. A tyrannosaur's distant bellow rolls once and fades. The tall browser lowers its head for a last mouthful of leaves and stands listening, claws resting like folded knives against its chest. In photographs of the mind it looks made up, a scythe-handed giant with feathers and a beak, a pot-bellied theropod that chose salad over pursuit. But watch it fit into its place, a living reach between soil and canopy, between hazard and indifference, and the oddity evaporates. The shape that seemed like a joke becomes an answer. In a world of teeth, make distance. In a world of droughts and floods, eat what remains. In a world of accidents, be hard to hurt. And so we come back to the present, carrying a little sand from every age in our shoes. We've walked a shoreline where headless jaws could turn water into a weapon. We've watched a five-eyed leaf glide over the seafloor and steal dinner with a careful hand. We've trailed a spike-backed whisper with legs like mittens across a living carpet. We've stepped aside for a tall, calm browser whose scythes were really ladders to the high shelf. And we've stood very still while a feathered sprinter weighed the wind and chose a single perfect moment. None of them looked plausible at first glance. That's the trick deep time plays on us. It moves the goalposts of normal so far and so often that we forget normal is just whatever survives long enough to write itself into stone. Look closely and you'll notice the same sentence hiding inside every oddity. Nature is not trying to be beautiful or scary or reasonable. It's trying to solve problems. Hallucigenia's needles are a memo to mouths. Don't. Opabinia's trunk is a safety extension cord. Feed the mouth without risking the head. Dunkleosteus's shears are the blunt poetry of leverage. If you can't outrun your lunch, out-engineer it. The terror bird's long stride and locked neck are a thesis on efficiency. Spend nothing until it matters, then spend everything at once. The Therizinosaurus's unreal claws are a revelation in disguise. The strangest tools may be gentle when pointed the right way. If these creatures look fake to us, it's because we mistake unfamiliar solutions for errors. But the planet is a lab that marks only 2 grades, works or doesn't, and these designs worked for millions of years. There's a quiet humility that comes from that realization. We like to think the present is the main act and the past is prologue, but most of Earth's story unrolled without us. If you slice time into equal-length pages and flip them like a slow-motion flipbook, almost every page would feature bodies so unlike ours that we'd squint and laugh at the reconstruction before catching ourselves. The ocean learned to be a forest and then forgot. Continents braided and broke apart like yarn. Eyes were invented more than once, jaws were tried on, modified, tossed away, reinvented in a different style. Weird isn't the exception, it's the rule. Our own era is a small footnote that will look bizarre to someone else someday, if someone else is still around to wonder. Maybe that's the most comforting part, the way the record turns fear into perspective. Apex predators rise and vanish. Armoured dynasties flourish and fade. Gentle giants with impossible hands feed in a floodplain and then give the world back to grass and teeth. And still, life keeps printing new drafts. It borrows old ideas, splices them into stranger compositions, and keeps rehearsing until something sings. Every fossil is a still frame from that rehearsal. When we open a rock and find one, we're not just looking at a creature, we're looking at a successful answer to a question the world used to ask every moment. So if any part of you felt a flicker of disbelief tonight, if the five eyes made you smile, or the armoured mouth felt too cinematic, or the bird that didn't fly felt like a prank, hold on to that feeling. That little jolt is your imagination noticing its own borders. Let it be an invitation, not a verdict. So, what problem does this shape solve? And watch the silhouette sharpen into sense. Ask, what would it feel like to live in that body, in that world? And the noise drops away until all you can hear is the rhythm of footsteps on old ground, the hush of water over plates of bone, the steady whisper of claws brushing leaves. We live in a lucky interval where stone still volunteers its secrets. Cliffs slump and split, riverbanks peel back, quarries bite into the earth, and the ink of ancient lives appears thin and stubborn. Somewhere right now a future favourite is drying in a lab tray, a new angle on an eye stalk, a hinge no one noticed before, a footprint that says I was here more clearly than a skull ever could. Each one will complicate our picture in the best way, making the past feel larger and more alive. Before we go, take one last walk through the gallery in your head. The Devonian sea dims to a green hush. The armoured brow slides past and water turns to a path. The Burgess shale brightens to a grey-blue day. A trembling pickpocket hand feeds a modest mouth. A thorny little commuter pads over a breathing carpet. The Cretaceous light warms to straw. A soft thunder of steps moves between reeds. Blades reach, not to harm, but to gather. On a South American plain, feathers lie close to muscle. A measured stride writes its metronome across the grass. The curtain falls, not with a crash, but with the soft click of rock settling around bone, and the theatre of deep time waits for the next patient audience. If you felt calmer by the end than you did at the beginning, that's no accident. There's a peace hiding inside these impossibilities. They remind us that the world can be stranger than we expect and still make perfect sense. That ugliness and elegance are just two ways of describing a good solution. That survival is often quiet, careful, unromantic work done day after day until the million small choices turn into a lineage. For us fragile, time-bound creatures, that's a gentle kind of hope. Thank you for wandering through this wilderness of old ideas with me. If one animal claimed a corner of your imagination, tell me which one and why. Your answers help me pick our next trail. If you want more of these slow journeys through unbelievable realities, you know where to find me. Leave a light on in the comments, follow the path to the next story, and if tonight's trip helped you sleep a little softer or dream a little deeper, that's the best kind of fossil we can make together. A small imprint of wonder, pressed into the present, waiting for tomorrow to find it again.